The fire crackled low in the hearth, sending shadows across the old wooden cabin walls as Samuel Wright, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the valley, leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. To the outside world, he was a man of stone and steel, hardened by years of cattle drives and the demands of land that stretched farther than the eye could see. But tonight there was no herd to count, no ranch hands to order, only silence and a plan brewing in his mind. For months he had kept his distance from Clara Dawson, the young widow who lived on the edge of his property with her little boy. Everyone knew her story. Her husband had been taken by fever, leaving her to fend for herself in a world where survival was a fight she hadn't asked for. Despite her poverty, despite the ridicule of townsfolk, Clara had kept her head high and her dignity intact, stitching clothes by lamplight and trading whatever meager goods she could scrape together to feed her son. Samuel had watched her from a distance, fascinated by the quiet strength that radiated from her weary frame, and wondered if she was the kind of woman who was genuine to the core, or if desperation might one day corrupt her values. That was why on this particular evening, Samuel had come under the pretense of delivering supplies, only to sink into the chair by her fire, feigning exhaustion until his lids drooped shut. He was not truly asleep, though his breathing slowed enough to convince anyone otherwise. He wanted to know what she would do when she believed no one was watching. Would she take from his satchel heavy with coin, perhaps pocket something for her own needs, or would she resist the temptation gnawing at someone in her dire position? Clara watched him carefully, her hands rough and red from endless scrubbing, her face framed by hair that had lost its shine but none of its beauty. Her son Jacob peered at the large rancher with wide, curious eyes clutching at her skirts. "Mama, is he sick?" the boy whispered. Clara knelt, her voice soft and steady. "He's just tired, sweetheart. Men like him work hard, even if it looks easy." She studied the man slumped in her chair, his broad chest rising and falling beneath his leather vest, his rugged hands resting open. She noticed the bulge of his coin pouch tied securely at his belt, and for a flicker of a moment, she thought how easy it would be, how one tug could change her world. Fill her cupboards, buy boots for Jacob, maybe even a roof that didn't leak. Her hand, trembling from hunger and exhaustion, hovered near the pouch, then quickly drew back as though burned. No, that was not who she was. Clara stood tall again, shoulders squared. "We do not take what is not ours," she whispered more to herself than to her son. Instead, she fetched a small basin, filled it with water warmed by the fire, and carefully soaked a cloth. Kneeling beside Samuel, she dabbed at his brow as though he were truly unwell. She adjusted the blanket around his shoulders, her touch gentle, tender, protective. "He brought us food, Jacob," she murmured. "The least we can do is make sure he's comfortable." Jacob nodded solemnly, trusting every word that left his mother's lips. Samuel, though pretending to sleep, felt the brush of her hand, heard the honesty in her voice, and his chest tightened. He had expected to catch her falter, to expose greed or weakness. But what he found instead was a heart pure and unyielding, even in the face of temptation. It humbled him in a way that ranch work never had. Clara rose, moving quietly, to the cupboard to prepare a simple meal with the flour and beans he had brought. Her movements graceful despite the heaviness in her bones, she hummed softly to her child, a lullaby carrying strength and sorrow in equal measure, and Samuel realized he was witnessing something more valuable than wealth. He was seeing the kind of woman who could carry a family on her back without complaint, who could choose honor over hunger. He shifted slightly in his chair, his heart pounding as though he were a boy again, nervous and unsure. When Clara returned to check on him once more, she saw his eyes open, glimmering with something she couldn't quite name. She froze, heat rising in her cheeks, at the thought that he had seen her care for him as if he were her own. I thought you were asleep," she stammered. Samuel's voice was low, steady, but softer than she had ever heard it. "I was testing something." "Clara, forgive me." Confusion clouded her features. "Testing?" He sat up, leaning forward, his gaze locked on hers. "I needed to know if what I believed about you was true, that even when no one is looking, you'd do the right thing. You could have taken from me. You could have stolen and justified it 100 ways. But you didn't. Instead, you cared." Clara shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. "I don't want your money, Mr. Wright. I only want to raise my boy honest, with pride in who we are. no matter how little we have. The sincerity in her words pierced him deeper than any bullet ever could. He reached for her hand, roughened but delicate in his palm. Clara, I've spent years building a ranch with more cattle and coin than I could count, but all of it feels empty when I sit in that big house alone. Tonight I saw more wealth in you than I've ever known. You don't need saving, but I find myself wanting to stand beside you. If you'll let me. Clara's breath caught, the room falling utterly silent except for the crackle of fire and the steady heartbeat of her child's small hand slipping into hers. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to smile, not with the forced politeness of survival, but with genuine hope breaking through her grief. Samuel's words were not charity, they were a bridge, an offer of companionship and respect.